Welcome back, guys. So as you know, I am flippin' excited for the Sega Genesis Mini. So far with what they've announced as far as the games go, look at that. I mean, there's just so many awesome games. There's been a handful of surprises, just stuff we did not know was going to be announced. And they've only shown the first 20 games. There's still 20 more games to go. And then the attention to detail with this system, with the fingerable cartridge slot. I mean, it's just there as a novelty. There's no reason for it, but I find that kind of neat. I mean, you can't put a cartridge in there. It doesn't do anything, but you can put your finger in there. I'm going to put something in there. I don't know what, but as soon as I get that bad boy, I'm going to be playing with that cartridge slot. You know it. And then also the expansion port slot. I mean, they showed this during FES 2019. Like, you can remove that for some odd reason. It's just those little details that just make this thing interesting. But I mean, more so it's the games. We got 20 more to go to find out, and I'm sure there's going to be some surprises. So a lot of you guys have been hitting me up. Hey, bro, what would you like to see on this system? What would be your picks? So today, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share with you my 5 picks, just 5 picks for now. I'll probably do a follow-up, but I only wanted to limit this to 5 picks. We got 20 to go. I didn't want to pick all 20. I'm going to pick 5. Why not, right? Actually, with a bonus one, so 6. We'll get into that because I think it might be kind of interesting. So this was kind of tough for me. You know, people have been hitting me up since the first reveal of this. What would you want to see on here? It's a little difficult for me because, and I know I've brought this up in past plenty of times, I didn't grow up with a Sega Genesis. It's not a new system to me. I had friends who had it and I played it quite a bit, but you guys know it's a bit different owning it versus somebody else having it and you playing it all the time. So my knowledge of the library of games isn't as extensive as others. You know, I know the Super Nintendo, the NES quite a bit better than the Sega Genesis, but I have enjoyed the system, and I'm sure some people will agree with some of these picks that I have, but these are games that I have played and I think would be pretty interesting on the system. So are these likely to happen? I don't know, but I think some of these should happen. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So my first pick, this is no particular order, just a random assortment of 5 games that I would like to see for one reason or another. But my first pick is going to be Mega Man The Wily Wars, released in 1994. So The Wily Wars, it was a remake of the first 3 NES games. So Mega Man 1, 2, and 3, obviously. And the cool thing with this is it's a unique approach on re-releasing old games. You know, it does have some improvements with graphics and whatnot, but the idea of the game is that Dr. Wily travels back in time to whoop Mega Man's ass. Hence why it's revisiting, you know, the first 3 games and not a completely new game, but it does have some uniqueness to it. So once you complete those first 3 games, you unlock the Wily Tower and you play through 3 new levels and fight some new bosses. Now, once you get into that Wily Tower, you also get to choose 8 weapons and 3 support items that you have earned from the previous 3 games to go ahead and tackle the tower. I think that's pretty damn cool. Now, once you complete those 3 new levels, that's when you get to fight Wily in his tower to complete the game. So this is a game that I've seen a lot of people always bring up, like, hey, we want an official US release. You know, and I hear it a lot of times, people saying, hey, you know, this was never released in the US. And I think that's it's a half truth because it was never released physically in the States, but it was released as a Sega Channel game, that little online service. You know, I don't have full details on that, never experienced the Sega Channel, but it was released in cartridge form in Japan and PAL regions. So access in the States definitely was pretty limited. I think this would be pretty cool to have an official release on the Genesis Mini because, yeah, I mean, it's a game that we really don't have access to in the States in official capacity. Definitely would be pretty awesome. So my next pick, like I said, there's no order here, man. So don't be like, oh, this is your least favorite. No, it's just no particular order. But my next pick, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Hyperstone Heist. This game came out in 1992, and it is pretty sweet. I have played through this game in the past, and I really dig it. So this game, it was a Sega Genesis exclusive, but at the same time, It did use mostly the same music and sound effects as the Super Nintendo game Turtles in Time. It also used levels from Turtles in Time and also the original arcade game in combination with some new levels, and things are kind of rearranged a bit. It does have less levels in total than Turtles in Time, but the stages are a bit longer than they were in the Super Nintendo game. You know, the game does move a bit faster. The enemies are tougher than the Super Nintendo version, you know, giving it a new challenge and a new feel. It is a different game. You know, it's definitely a unique experience. And, you know, if people who had played Turtles in Time, I definitely think if they never experienced Hyperstone Heist, they can appreciate this. You know, there are some differences. It's a tougher challenge in my opinion, but it is a damn fine game. So it would be pretty cool to see that on the Sega Genesis Mini. I mean, we already got some Konami releases. I think the one thing that could hold something like this back would be, you know, the Turtles licensing, right? And, you know, I don't necessarily think that's the biggest issue. I think it's more of an image type thing with Nickelodeon, whomever, you know, is in control of this stuff. Looking at, you know, they keep changing the image, the way the Ninja Turtles look. I don't like the current style of these guys, just kind of ridiculous, but I kind of think they might not go for it. But why not? I mean, just because you have a new version of the Turtles who look kind of wonky doesn't mean, you know, we can't revisit the past. So it could happen, but at the same time, maybe not. Who knows? But definitely one I think a lot of people would appreciate being on the system. Now, my next pick, this is one that I played quite a bit on other systems and in the arcade, but I know the Sega Genesis port is probably the best port out there. And hey, we don't have any kind of racing games on this thing yet that I have seen. And sure, this is not necessarily a racing game. I mean, it kind of is, but Roadblasters. So Roadblasters was released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis. It's a racing game, but it has combat elements. It's an arcade game that I loved playing. It's fairly simple, but there's obstacles, enemy cars, cannons on the side of the road shooting at you, mines, all sorts of crazy things to make it fairly challenging. The objective of the game, it's fairly basic. It's fairly simple. Just get to the end of the track without running out of fuel. But it is something that the game does take some precision. You got to get used to things. You got to have that hand-eye coordination down and be paying attention to that road. I just always enjoyed this game, and I love it on the Sega Genesis. And I think it would be an interesting addition to the Sega Genesis Mini. Just, it's one of those games that I really love. It is a simple game, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. And why not, right? So my next pick for the Sega Genesis Mini that I think would be kind of cool, but at the same time, I'm kind of hesitant on picking this one. And I'll explain why, but that's going to be Sunset Riders. So Sunset Riders came out in 1992 on the Sega Genesis, and if you've been with me since the beginning of my channel, you would know it is one of my all-time favorite arcade games. I did like a little, like my top favorite arcade games series, and this was one of them. I mean, that was a long while ago, and the video was kind of crappy, but you know what? It is what it is. You know, but I definitely would be interested playing through this on the Sega Genesis, you know, Mini, despite knowing that it is missing a good portion of content compared to the arcade and the Super Nintendo version. Super Nintendo version holds a very near and dear place next to my heart. It's one of the first games I owned on the Super Nintendo, and I flippin' loved it. And the Sega Genesis version feels a bit different. Feels like it's a harder game to me, but it does have some changes. You know, so the premise of the game is, you know, simply you're just a bounty hunter going after outlaws as the end bosses in each stage. You have like a little wanted poster and a bounty for them, and you're going after those mofos. So the Genesis version, though, was missing 2 of the 4 playable characters, unfortunately, and also only has 4 of the 8 original bosses. So that is kind of a downer, but it also does include an interesting 2-player versus mode to change things up so you can like battle each other. I mean, that's kind of cool. It's a little quirky, not a big selling point of the game, but it's kind of a neat addition. But you know, despite some of the changes, some of the missing content, I still think this would be a solid choice to be included on the Mini. The big reason for that is not everybody played the Super Nintendo version. If this was the only version you played and you love the Sega Genesis, this is going to be the version for you. For me, it's the Super Nintendo version. I mean, beside the arcade, arcade is the killer version there. The Super Nintendo version was just legit for me, but I still would love to play through this on the Sega Genesis Mini. I think it would be a great addition. So moving forward, my next pick. And actually, I think this is my fifth pick, right? So I said 5, but with a bonus one. We'll get to that bonus one in a second. But my fifth pick, Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Another one that has some differences, but I don't think this is as drastic as Sunset Riders when you compare it to the Super Nintendo version. But Zombies Ate My Neighbors, released in 1993. I love the game on the Super Nintendo. I've played it on the Genesis as well. And while it's essentially the same game, there were some minor differences. The game's graphics on the Sega Genesis, it was squished horizontally in order to fit the status bar on the right side of the screen. The SNES version used the full screen, but put a transparent overlay when you hit the shoulder button so you could see like the little mini map and whatnot. I think this may have been due to the Sega Genesis not having hardware transparencies and less background layers, so they kind of had to do what they had to do to get the game out there. But regardless of those changes and some slight differences in color and detail, the game is still very solid on the Genesis. You're saving your neighbors from zombies and monsters, you're using all sorts of different weapons. It's fun no matter what system you're playing on. Don't get it twisted. I think it's a sweet game on the Sega Genesis. Not as drastically different as Sunset Riders versus the Super Nintendo version. And this game is playable with 3 buttons. Does utilize 6-button controller, and it utilizes it very well for weapon swapping. But with a 3-button controller, you can do the same. It's just, using combinations of buttons. It works, so it could work with the US version or the European version of the Genesis Mini. Only having those 3 buttons. God, why did they do that, man? I mean, if that's the one thing we can nag on about is, why did Japan get 6 buttons? We got 3 buttons. I mean, I guess it is what it is. I'm embracing it. I'm fine with it. But there we go. That was my 5th and final pick, besides my bonus pick, that I have a feeling like these 5 games I just mentioned, I think there could be some kind of a chance of them being on the system. But this pick, I'm leaving it as a bonus pick because I think it would be freaking awesome, but I don't know how likely it could happen. And that's going to be Ultra Core. Ultra Core, released in 2019 for the Mega SG, and supposed to be releasing on the PS4 and Vita. But it was a game, it was originally called Hardcore. It was being developed for like the Amiga, Sega Genesis, some other systems. Then it was scrapped, and it was finished and rebranded and whatnot and put out for the Mega SG. This can run on Sega Genesis hardware. From what I understand, it's a Sega Genesis game, so why not? I don't see why this couldn't be a surprise release for the Mini. I think that would be awesome. The game, having that run and gun action going on, kind of not exactly Metroid-esque, but it does share some similarities. It's like Turrican in a way. But it's a flippin' awesome game. I streamed it quite a bit for hours. Oh my God. The game is so challenging and so much fun. I was extremely addicted to it. So I think, like how the Super Nintendo Mini had boom, we're putting Star Fox 2 on their unreleased game. Why couldn't we get an unreleased game on the Sega Genesis Mini? I think they could make it happen, but I don't know how likely that is. But Ultra Core on this would be flippin' sweet. Why the hell's not, right? Make it happen, Sega. Why not? So there you go, my 5 picks plus a bonus pick. Hey, I mean, I could go on 15 games more. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll do another follow-up with another 5 games. But let me know, what games do you want to see on here? I'm sure there's going to be people who don't agree with the games I picked, or think there's reasons why they couldn't be on there, or think there's better games to pick than what I picked. Hey, that's why we all have different brains in our bodies. You know what I mean? These brain meats up here, boom, all thinks differently. So let me know what your picks are. Really do appreciate it, guys. Can't wait for the Sega Genesis Mini so I can stick my finger in that slot. We'll catch you guys next time. Peace out, bye-byes, and boom. Bye. Bye-bye.